congratulations, everybody. We've now reached the halfway point. You're over the hump in our resource guide, this e-course on how to give your child a classical Christian education at home. And we've also completed the foundation. We've laid a foundation in terms of the method, the biblical and the classical method known as the trivium, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And now we're going to move on to the content of a classical Christian education, and you can think about that as kind of the grist for the mill of the trivium. It's the content on which the trivium functions. And so we're talking today about the content of a classical Christian education. My name is Dennis Oliver Woods. I'm headmaster at Kingsway Classical Academy, the world's first online classical Christian academy for grades 7 through 12. Our lesson objective will be to explain how the classical literature applies to your everyday life and the life of your child. Now, in recent lessons, we've talked about the trivium-based method of classical Christian education, grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And today I'd like to share with you how the content of such an education, the classical literature, can change your child's life forever. Now, we've been discussing a classical Christian education as though it were the new kid on the block. But prior to John Dewey's introduction of his radical progressive system in 1894, classical education was all there was. You either had a classical education or you had no education at all. What is progressive education? Since John Dewey, we've grown accustomed to pablum. Progressive education removed the great books from the curriculum, and the advent of television removed books, period. We've been transformed from a print-oriented society to a visual-oriented society, from typography to television. Television has taught all of us to expect entertainment in everything. Education, politics, even religion. Our attention span has been reduced to the 8-minute period between commercials. As some would say, the attention span of a gnat. It has been convenient to turn our kids over to the TV and public school babysitters, but that convenience has come at a very steep price, the price of mediocrity and the price of intellectual suicide. According to Dan Smithwick of the Nehemiah Institute, this is a quote, each new kindergarten class that enters into the government humanistic system of education is being trained to go against the Christian faith, end quote. Can you imagine what would have happened if the children of Israel had entered into the promised land, turned the education of their children over to the Canaanites? Do you suppose God would have smiled with approval at the graduates of Canaanite U? It just sounds crazy when you put it in that context, doesn't it? Yet amazingly, this is precisely what Christian parents in modern enlightened America have done. We've turned our children over to a system of education that outlaws God, quite literally, from the curriculum. And then we wonder why they reject God and turn to drugs and promiscuity later on in life. I am afraid, warned Martin Luther, that the schools will prove the very gates of hell unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures and engraving them in the heart of the youth. End of quote. First, we buy into the socialistic idea that society is obligated to provide our child's education. Then we stand amazed when our kids emerge with a socialistic worldview. They believe the world owes them a living, and they don't hesitate to vote money out of their neighbor's pocket for whatever strikes their fancy. Fathers, you can no longer afford to shirk the responsibility of educating your children biblically. The direct command of God to fathers regarding their children is, quote, to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, end quote, Ephesians 6:4b. The classical alternative. Now here are some of the benefits of educating your children classically. 4 benefits. First of all, your children interact intellectually with all the great ideas that have been handed down to us from the past. Gems of distilled wisdom are lying there on the ground, just waiting to be gathered up. Number 2, your children are exposed to writing at its finest. The classics are classics because of the beauty of their style as well as the majesty of their ideas. Number 3, your children are given a vision that extends beyond the usual myopic fascination with the present. It is the height of arrogance to assume that we moderns are the paragon of wisdom. If we know anything at all, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants. And number 4, your children, through intensive reading, will develop an understanding of the grand sweep of world history with its action, its art, its music, and its ideas. Thus they become key workmen in the rewarding task of recovering the cultural heritage we have lost. Now, here's a cautionary note, though, a word of caution. Too often in the past, Christians have embraced the classical literature uncritically. As a result, the Bible has been diluted or nudged into the background. As a result, man's law, or so-called natural law, came to replace God's law in important matters like government law and general culture. However, when our children are trained to approach the classical literature critically, a marvelous thing happens. They are transformed into people of rare vision. Examining the classics through the biblical grid forces them to think clearly about the relevant Bible doctrine. What does the Bible say about, what Socrates is saying here? For example, their understanding of God's truth is refined, and they emerged with a focused biblical worldview. Okay, test your understanding. This is a matching exercise, which is a little bit tricky when we present it verbally, opposed to seeing it on paper. But let's just consider 5 items: the word progressive, man's law, public school, father, and classical. On the right, we have 5 other words and phrases: responsible to educate, 1894, ancient method, Canaanite, and natural law. So when we think of the word progressive, or when we hear the word progressive, that we should associate that with 1894, John Dewey's introduction of the progressive approach. Number 2, we think of man. We hear the word man's law, the phrase, and that should remind us of natural law, man's law or natural law. Number 3, we hear the word public school, and that should remind us of the Canaanites and Canaanite U. Number 4, the word father is associated with responsibility to educate. And number 5, classical, the word classical is associated with the word ancient method. For more information, if you're interested in a commentary on the classics, permit me to make a recommendation, and I know I'm obviously biased here, but I can think of nothing better than my own 2-volume Keys to the Classics, a biblical analysis of the great books of Western civilization. Volume 1 contains short essays on 50 of the classical authors, ranging from Homer to Van Til. It includes reading assignments in the classics and almost 500 open-end questions to ponder as you read. Volume 2 answers each of those 500 questions, and in doing that, it emerges as a concise but I think very readable history of philosophy. Now, either volume can stand on its own, but together they comprise a powerful tool to arm your children against the secular assault they're exposed to on a daily basis, and you too. Here's what one homeschool mom had to say about the material in Keys to the Classics. Quote, "Your material on the Kingsway website has been an enormous blessing. I have especially appreciated your ability to distill an author's writing into a few clear ideas and show their biblical implications for today. This is exactly what I've been looking for and didn't know it existed." And that's Cynthia Glenn Diltz, a homeschool mom. And you can find these 2 books on the KingswayClassicalAcademy.com website as well. So that's it for lesson 7, and we'll see you tomorrow for the next lesson, Lord willing.